What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? It is your boy, Matty Peveril from Steelers TDU with the Steelers War Room Series. It's our Day 3 Top 75 Draft Board and Steeler Fits. Excited to bring this to you. We are just hours away from the draft by the time this goes live to air. Can't wait for this. Excited to get into this show with you. I will just say, if you're not a subscriber and you'd like to be subscribed, you've seen some of our content, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button if you are a subscriber and you like the show today, and hit the bell icon too if you're not subscribing and getting all the notifications from us there. Really excited for draft day, day 1, 2, and 3. You'll see a lot of content on Steelers TDU. I'll be doing some live streaming as well with Marky Davison, my co-host, on Steelers TDU Boys and Steelers TDU Mad Monday. On his channel as well. So stay tuned. We'll give you the links in a community post when they come out. So really excited for that one. But into today's show, it's going to be a massive show. Cannot wait. Offense, defense, just like day 1 and day 2. If you didn't listen to those, go back and do those after this one. And hopefully this gets you all keen for the draft, which is only a matter of hours and really day 2 and day 3, less than a day away. Okay, so a couple of themes with my day 3 guys. And remember, these are guys, they're not necessarily my top overall 100 prospects. These are guys that I think could be available for the Steelers and at position needs, and guys I like too. So one thing that you will see as a theme in this is is cheap value and balance. So I've looked at making sure there's equal offense and defense. We've balanced that across positions of depth and where the Steelers could get value guys if they fall and drop. That as a result, many of the guys you'll see on the next couple of slides, as I talk them through, will go higher than day 3. I predict that there'll be probably almost 10 of these guys that will go higher. And we've got about, I think it's 36, 37 guys that I'm going to talk you through. Don't worry, we're gonna talk some highlights. But the other theme to it is that on day 1, if you caught day 1's conversation that I had with the 8 players and 6 unique players, to round 1, because I had a couple of guys in round 1 that could be drafted in round 2, guys like Steve Avila and Osiris Torrance. The theme on day 1 was trenchy, not trendy. The theme on day 2 was tacklers, not tricksters. Today, you're going to see tacklers and tricksters. And tackles as well. I have factored in this and beefed it up based on the fact that Steelers right now they've got 1 4th-round draft pick and 2 7th-round draft picks. They've got a gap of 112 between 120 and I think it's 232 that they've got in the 7th round, their first pick. The Steelers, and I've been saying this since January, will find a way to bridge that gap. It is highly unlikely they're going to go 2 rounds with the talent available and the guys they would have evaluated without picking anyone. I just don't see that. I cannot imagine that would happen, particularly if they trade back at some point in the 2nd as well. Okay, the other thing I've done is I've considered needs, value, and also best player available, because that's how I believe you should approach the draft, particularly when it comes to day 3. All right, let's crack into it. So let's start with the O-line guys. These are ranked in how I would pick them. They are a draft board for the O-line guys. The first guy I've got is Chandler Zavala out of NC State. He was actually 6th in PFF from a blocking grade, so that's really interesting. You've got Braden Daniels out of Utah. He was considered 51 for his blocking grade. He was a tackle, though, and he's expected to shift inside. That's a Daniel Jeremiah evaluation. But he actually had the 15th most snaps of all draft-eligible college linemen and draft eligible for 2023. You then had Olskun. Now, Olskun was actually 77th, which seems low, but he was actually ahead of Osiris Torrance. And he did play for Michigan. Obviously, that's a top conference there. So that is kind of interesting with Olskun. He should have a really good career in the league. He's definitely went to a premier school against premier opposition, did well. You then have Andrew Voorhees as well. So he was 39th for his blocking grade. He allowed 2 sacks. So there's a lot of guys that didn't allow any sacks. So he allowed 2. We then get into Nick Saladevri out of Old Dominion, who is a tackle. Some teams, whoever drafts him, may keep him at tackle. I've also heard the narrative that he kicks inside the guard. If he does that, that'll be interesting. He actually was 13th out of all eligible draft players for his blocking grade. So that was pretty interesting, I thought. You then have Carter Warren out of Pittsburgh, so it might be really familiar to some of our listeners and viewers. Now, Nick was interesting. Carter Warren, going back to Carter Warren, he was 30th in the league for blocking grade and had 1 sack. You then have Jarrett Patterson, who I was a big fan of going into the college year. He went back to Notre Dame. He was meant to be the top center prospect coming out. And before the emergence of Mason Cole during the season, he was someone that was definitely on draft boards around there for Steel fans. I saw him there on league draft boards. It seemed to fit, particularly after the whole Creed Humphrey situation in 2021. So definitely it's interesting that he slipped back on the boards. He had a tough season at Notre Dame from that perspective. You then have Jackson Kirkland. Now, Jackson Kirkland out of Washington's an interesting player. He was meant to go in last year's draft, and then I think it was he had an ankle injury and surgery in last January, but he definitely had to pull out of the process. Now, he is listed at tackle. That's where he's played a lot of college career, but he will probably kick inside. I know he played a little bit inside in college, but he should kick inside when it comes to his professional career. I will say I had a really hard time cutting out 2 players, Eric Miller from Purdue and Antonio Murphy from UCLA. Now, Antonio Murphy was interesting because he was 140th in his block grade, so definitely worse than anyone on this list. And he did allow 3 sacks, but he has been likened to Nate Herbig, and he is a big guy. He's about 6'4", 314 to 320 pound. But he is someone that popped up a little bit and can do some things. So if he was undrafted, and same with Eric Miller, the offensive tackle out of Purdue, I'd be interested in the Steelers picking them up as UDFAs once the draft completes. Okay, so on the more of the playmaking side, we've got Jaron Hall, who's probably the top rated out of these guys, Dorian Thompson Robinson, and Aiden O'Connell and Malik Cunningham. Now, Jaron Hall, I think, will go back into the 3rd, early 4th. Probably too early for the Steelers to get him. Dorian Thompson Robinson probably has a higher grade for most people, although I really like Aiden O'Connell, who was the quarterback at Purdue. I put Dorian Thompson Robinson higher because I'm going to trust who I deem some experts over that and his running ability over Aiden O'Connell. I've put Malik Cunningham in there because even though I think he probably will go undrafted or be a late 7th pick, and he's a mobile quarterback, I didn't think he had a great Senior Bowl. I like to see the Steelers pick him up because I think he can do things on the scout teams, and he's a good 3rd quarterback. Aiden O'Connell might go undrafted. Dorian Thompson Robinson could go anywhere from 5th to the back end of the 7th, particularly after what teams saw out of Brock Purdy. But just on O'Connell, 6'3", 213 pounds. So kind of a very Kenny Pickett style body. He had 9,219 yards in college, a 65 to 30 touchdown to interception ratio, 826 yards. He had 826 attempts in college for a 7.4 yard per reception average. So yeah, kind of interesting. Some good stats there from him. On the tight end side of things, I've got Brenton Strange in there. Look, I had actually Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan, but with all the hype around Brenton Strange, even though he hasn't had the most prolific statistics in his college career, the fact that he's at Penn State, I did see a tie there if they were going to go tight end. So I did put him on the list. I did remove Luke Schoonmaker. As I said, I did that because I thought he was a bit more likely. It was a tough decision to make, but I've seen a lot of talk about him in the last 3 or 4 days, which means I think he's higher on boards than maybe what I had him. So just honesty in that process. Payne Durham, though, is a guy I want to talk about, particularly after his Senior Bowl. He had 1,275 yards in college, 21 TDs, but he had 8 of those touchdowns this year of the 8 of the 21, so more than a third. He had 560 of those yards this year. He had 6 TDs in 2021, and he had a 68 pass block grade in 2021. So that was kind of interesting when I saw that on PFF. That's actually quite high for a tight end. In 2022, he lined up in the slot 57% of the times. And statistically on PFF, from a grade perspective, he's a better run blocker than a pass blocker. So that was kind of interesting because he's definitely a pass catching tight end, but I wanted to see how he could block. He wasn't a bad pass blocker. And as you saw that with the grade of the 68 in 2021, but he's a better run blocker across his college career if you look at the PFF grades. So that's a good thing. That means his blocking is a little bit better. So he's kind of that all-round tight end. The other thing that I thought was a particularly interesting stat about Payne Durham, and I know he dealt with some injuries in college, was that he only had 8 drops in his whole career, which I thought that was pretty incredible for a guy that caught over 1,275 yards worth of balls and 21 TDs. All right, on to the wide receivers on this list. Xavier Hutchinson is a guy that I think will go in the third, if not the back end of the second, out of Iowa State. I heard sort of the draft analysis on him fairly early on in the piece that suggested if he'd played it, he was 6 in yards on PFF, which I thought was pretty interesting, but he only had 6 TDs. So not only was the quarterback part an issue, I think, when it came to his overall draft grade, I think as well, only the 6 TDs, if he'd gotten to double digits, he would have rocketed up the boards. So I really like that from his side of things. I think he's going to go unsung, and whoever gets him is going to get a really good possession wide receiver who's actually got a bit of speed to him as well. All right, the next guy on the list I've got. Now, I had to put Jaden Reed ahead of Trey Tucker, even though I really like Trey Tucker. Now, Jalen Reed out of Michigan State. The Steelers, I think, might have brought him in for a visit. I can't recall that specifically. But I know that there had been, I have seen chatter during the draft process about the Steelers and Jaden Reed. I do like Trey Tucker. I want to talk about him. He was 52nd in yards from wide receivers that were eligible for the draft this year with 608 yards and 3 TDs. Now, he played for Cincinnati. So remember, he's their second or third wide receiver behind Tyler Scott. And I mental blank on the other one. I think it's not Trey Palmer. So when you're not that first wide receiver and you're that second or third guy and you're getting those sorts of stats and he did better in previous years, he's a guy that is going to go under the radar for a lot of people. I mean, I saw him where he went undrafted. He's probably, quite possibly, going to be a 7th round wide receiver, but he will prove some people wrong in this league. That will be a mistake. I actually have him ahead of Tillman, who had Jalen Reed had 636 yards and 5 TDs, by the way. That's why he's ahead. Tillman had 417 yards and 3 TDs. I know the Steelers brought him in for a visit, so that's the reason why I had him over Kayshon Boutte. Kayshon Boutte had 538 yards and 2 TDs. He was meant to really come on this year for LSU, Kayshon Boutte, and he didn't. So I think that's really hurt him in the draft process. He should probably be gone by the end of the 4th. But if I was in the Steelers boardroom drafting players, I was in their war room, I'm probably going Hutchinson, Trey Tucker, Jalen Reed, Cedric Tillman. I don't know. Tillman's hard. I kind of have him in Boutte level. But I'm really high on Trey Tucker. So we'll see how he goes when he makes it to the NFL. But Xavier Hutchinson will surprise people in this league. And if he's there at the start of day 4, you've got to consider him. You really, really do. And you've got an ability to get him adjusted to the NFL. And then, Deontay Johnson is very cheap to move in 2024. There's only a dead cap hit of $3 million. So do remember that one. And Allen Robinson would need to sign a new deal to stay with the Steelers as well. All right, so that wraps up the offense. I got through that pretty quick. Hopefully I've not talked too fast for all you listeners out there. All right, so we'll move on to the defense. So we've got Ryland Moss in there. Very unlikely to be available in round 4, but I've got him there in case he is. He'll start out at cornerback. There's a lot of discussion about moving him into like a free safety or a general safety position, given he is given his paint job, as Bucky Brooks called it there. But he's definitely a really fast guy. I think he's about 6'2", pretty fast guy out of there. Good twitch, good can move. He's a guy that can play corner despite his white paint job, to quote Bucky Brooks. You've got Travis Hodges Tomlinson, who I do believe that could be there at 1. I see him as a slot corner, even though he's quite light. He is the nephew of LaDainian Tomlinson. So you could see him. And then I've got Darius Rush, who also I don't think will be there. I have him as a 4th ground grade, but if there's a run on cornerbacks, you could see him in the 3rd. Particularly. So I did think that was kind of interesting. We then have JL Skinner, who I think would have had a much better draft process, except for the fact that he had a back injury and missed the combine. Now, remember, I've already talked about Sydney Brown on day 2. JL Skinner out of Boise State is about 211 to 213 pounds and 6'4". Really fast guy. I think it's deciding whether he's going to be that box safety, strong safety guy that can mark up on tight ends, whether he'll put on size and even become, a coverage linebacker, particularly like a 4-3. But I think, though, JL Skinner will stay a safety. It's just he's had a really quiet draft process since that injury. So it's going to be very interesting to judge what he is. He is very raw, though, in what he's shown in college, but like athletic traits out of this world. We then get to Kayvon Merriweather, who's a safety out of Iowa. Now, he can play in a wider DB role, but I have him as a safety. We have him at 6 foot and 205 pounds according to PFF, but on Sports Reference, which is the college platform for Pro Football Reference, they have him at 211 pounds. Now, I'll read you some of these stats from him. He had an 88 defensive grade in PFF. He had 40 tackles in 2022 according to PFF. Sports Reference had him at 47. He only allowed 11, he only missed 7 tackles according to PFF. I think they didn't have the missed tackles there for him that I saw on Sports Reference. But again, if he had 7 from 47, that means he's only missing 1 and 7 tackles. He only allowed 11 receptions on 26 targets, which is pretty cool. That's like a less than 40% in 2022 for 87 yards, which is 7.4 yards per reception. But if you think about that as a proportion of targets, it's like below the 3 or 4 range. He had 3 interceptions and 4 PBUs for so-called pass deflections. I prefer pass deflections over pass breakups. And he played a lot more in the box compared to free safety as well. And he had 1 forced fumble according to Sports Reference. Yeah, so there was only a 40% snap difference between the amount of snaps he played in the box and in free safety. So he's a really versatile safety. I like him as this hybrid backup to them both. He's bigger than Kazi as well. So he could be a really nice depth piece, particularly, for the Steelers for the next 3, 4, 5 years. So I really like the idea of Kayvon Merriweather there. We then have one of my favorite guys in the draft, particularly late. He probably might even get picked very early in round 4, if not back in round 3. And that's Mate Mapu, who's Daniel Jeremiah's 73rd player, I think, on the list, or 75th player. I'm pretty sure it's 73rd on DJ's top 150. He's 216 to 220 pounds out of Sacramento State, so no Sports Reference stats, unfortunately. He's a bit of a Steelers fan. He talked about that at the Senior Bowl. He talked about he's been on that since 2009, did have good chats with the Steelers at the Senior Bowl. He said, Mike Tomlin is not my coach yet. Now, that could just be a turn of phrase, but I did like hearing that out of Mate Mapu. Had a bit of notoriety among scouts as well during the process because of some of the things he was doing. Played all over the place for them, actually, at Sacramento State. He had snaps at box 249 in 2022, free safety 56, and slot 510. So you pretty much can move him anywhere from slot corner to box safety, which is going to be really versatile for the Steelers. And if they were to pick him, and if he can put on 7 or 8 pounds, and I think his frame allows that, you could see him at the linebacker position as well. Maybe they could finally get what they were looking for from Marcus Allen and never ever got. He is 6'2" and 5 8 or 6. I have him listed at 6'3" in Sports Reference. In 2022, he had 2 sacks, according to PFF, 2 hits. He allowed 44 receptions from 65 targets, so that's 67%. 1 TD he had 3 pass breakups or pass deflections and 2 interceptions. He had 29 stops, according to PFF, which is where he made a play that stopped the offense, and he allowed, according to them, 449 yards. So that's Mate Mapu. I then have got Henry Toto, who could go ahead of these guys. He could go in round 3. The way that he has slipped down the board, though, and the rankings of linebackers, I do think he'll be there early on day 3 from Alabama. But if he goes higher, don't be surprised, particularly if there's a run on linebackers. I then got Nick Herbig out of Wisconsin. He played outside there, a bit of inside as well. I've seen him mocked as a general linebacker. I've seen him mocked as a inside linebacker. I've seen him mocked as an outside linebacker. There's a lot of hype. I don't fully love the player. I'd pick other guys ahead of him. But the Steelers might know. The Steelers know better than me on these things. I have heard him hyped in the draft process. He also comes from Wisconsin, where we got TJ Watt. Brother obviously is with the Steelers. You just never know. And then I've got Owen Papo, who, again, I don't think is there much past round 4. Safety linebacker guy. He's about 217 to 220 pounds. Thought he was going to be a linebacker. Some teams could play him at safety if they're going bigger safety, get him marking up on a tight end. Look, he's an interesting one. I don't love it from the Steelers, but given I'm mocking a guy like a Mate Mapu, I could be remiss to not mock a guy like Owen Papo, who had a really fast 40 time as well. So, yeah, I wouldn't hate it if the Steelers picked him. I do see the benefit in picking a guy like that, particularly when you're playing the amount of sub package that the Steelers are playing. Okay, so let's move on to the other side of the football. Now, those guys actually, I'll just say, are ranked by position, not and sort of by position. They're not ranked in where I'd pick them. I should clarify that on those guys. Yellow on the screen for those on the visual side. For the audio side, you'll see those guys. You'll all those guys I just talked through are the ones that are yellow on the screen. All right. On the other side of the screen, we've got the outside linebackers, the edge rushers, and the D-line guys. Now, I have ranked the outside linebacker. I haven't ranked the outside linebackers. I've listed them. I have ranked, though. I know I haven't actually. I haven't ranked. I've ranked I've not really ranked the defensive lineman. I'll talk you through why. So let's just start off with Jose Ramirez, who out of Eastern Michigan, 6'2", 251 pounds. According to Sports Reference, he had 20 and a half sacks in his career. 12 of those were in 2022. 2 forced fumbles, 19 and a half tackles for a loss in his career. In 2022, and he had 66 tackles. So that was pretty cool. 19 and a half tackles for a loss, 2 forced fumbles, 12 sacks, 66 tackles. Love that out of him. And in his career also, he also had 7 pass defenses at Eastern Michigan. Right, Lonnie Phelps. So Lonnie Phelps out of Kansas State had pretty remarkable sort of Senior Bowl, had a pretty cool year. I thought he was going to end up a 4-3 DE, but then it does seem, I have heard a lot of interest from the three. I've heard there is a lot of interest from the 3-4 teams about getting him at outside linebacker. He had 32 tackles for a loss in his college career. He had 21 and a half sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and 114 tackles. They have him at about 6'3", 245 to 250 pounds. I've also seen one that's had him 242 to 248. Can't recall where I saw that. He had 11 and a half sacks in 2022, 11 and a half tackles for a loss, 7 sacks, 1 pass defense, 1 forced fumble, and 57 tackles. So a lot of his college production came this year. I have Jose Ramirez, 2 rounds ahead of wherever Lonnie Phelps is drafted. I do have a 4th round grade on Ramirez, to be frank. You then have got Andre Carter. Now, Andre Carter out of Army is an interesting guy. I thought he'd end up as a DE in a 4-3. He is 6'6" and a bit, or 6'7". He's got the frame to put on way more weight. I think I've seen some people saying he's 240. I've seen some people listing him as 260. Even still, if he's the 260, I did see one of the more ones that I trust at 263. If I look at that, you got to remember that guys that go to the military colleges have to be ready and fit to military standard, not necessarily to football standard, which is why the rumor is he could put on a lot of size. I think the Steelers might like him the versatility and bring him in and getting him to learn pass rush moves and those sorts of things and how the Steelers like to do it, and then get him to put on weight and move him and kick him inside a little bit. Now, how to put this? I like him and the reason why he's on my list is because he's a versatile player, and if he drops and he's available in like around 6, or even around 7, great. Someone I do think will pick him in around 5 or before, but he's there because I do see the value in getting a guy like that you can adapt and mold and shape to what you want. We then have Colby Wooden Moro Ojomo, Keandre Coburn, and Zach Pickens. Now, Ojomo and Coburn are both out of Texas Longhorns, and those regular listeners of the show and subscribers know that I'm a big fan of the Texas Longhorns. That's my college team. Look, Moro Ojomo is someone that's got more love from others. He could go on day 2. I don't think he's had enough of it. I don't think he's had a solid enough draft process for that to happen, and I don't think he stood out enough in college for that to happen. I did want to share a little bit more about Pickens and Coburn. So Coburn, he's 6'2", 348 tackles. 348 tackles, 348 pounds. Does show up on tape as stopping the run. He had 95 tackles in his college career. But what you need to remember is that until 2022, he never played more than 10 games. One season he played 9, 1-8, and then won 3, and then 3 games in his rookie year. He had 6.5 sacks in his college career, 2 pass defenses, and 3 forced fumbles, according to Sports Reference. But he had 29 of those tackles in 2022, 2.5 of those sacks, almost a third of those sacks. No pass defenses, but he had 2 of the forced fumbles this year. So he did have a really good year from his perspective as well. So I like Keandre Coburn at the back end of the 7th or as an undrafted free agent for the Steelers. I think he's someone that could actually crack this squad. And I have a much better grade on him than I had on a guy like Isaiah Buggs when he was drafted out of Bama. Colby Wooden probably will go earlier than this, so I will say that, as could Zach Pickens. Colby Wooden is out of Auburn. I would see him as a defensive end in the Steelers system. So, maybe that's someone he could learn behind in terms of learning behind Cam Hayward. But I did want to talk about Zach Pickens because I've had a really high grade on him. Like I'd be happy to take him on day 2 if he had more picks as a defensive lineman and edge rusher, particularly. He had 131 tackles in his college career, 11.5 sacks. 11.5 tackles for a loss, 7.5 sacks, 4 pass defenses, and no forced fumbles. That was the only downgrade I had on him. But in 2022, he had 42 of his 131 tackles, so just under a third, 4 of his tackles for a loss, 2.5 of his sacks, so a third of his sacks, and 3 of his pass defenses. So he had a really good year. And he's someone that in the right scheme could really develop, which is why I've got him on this list because I trust the Steelers with defensive linemen. And he could provide that value pretty late in the draft once there's been a run on the interior guys, like on day 2 particularly. But don't be surprised to see him go back in the 3rd or in the 4th, be gone by realistically makes sense for the Steelers to select him. So with that wraps up the full top 75. The draft is happening in a mere matter of hours. We're going to have round 1. Really excited for that. It's been a real long process. You know what, as a Steel fan, I'm just damn excited to see who the Steelers draft across the next 3 days. Excited to see where they go. What have we got right? What have we got wrong? Who's there? Who's not? How people develop in the league. And remember, not all this work and interest is for nothing. As Mike Tomlin said in his press conference with Omar Khan, they do their due diligence because these guys become available at times during their rookie contract via cuts, trades, or even once they enter free agency. And that's why it's important to do your draft due diligence, set up the relationships with these players like Tomlin and Omar Khan do through the draft process and did at the combine. Remember, and you can go back and listen to the show Mark and I did on Omar Khan if you haven't already. He talked about O-line, D-line, linebacker, cornerback. And that you see really reflected in what I talked about. He saw depth overall in the draft, but those were the positions. Whether he meant them in that order, interesting. Tomlin sort of didn't rank them in that order necessarily in that Omar Khan press conference that they had, their pre-draft press conference. But, I do think sometimes when people just say things forward, there's a bit of truth to it. It's that subconscious kind of thing. But there also are the needs that the Steelers have, coincidentally. But with that's going to wrap up this episode of Steelers War Room. It wraps up my top 75 draft board and Steeler fits across all 3 days of the draft. Let me know what you think in the comments. Really excited for it. You can tweet at me during the draft at MattPev. And as I said, if you're not a subscriber to the show and this is the first time you found us, hope we've interested you enough to subscribe or at least like the show. But with that, enjoy the draft process. Can't wait to see the Steelers draft, see how they get prepared into 2023. So as always, go Steelers.